This land, right in the center of Europe, is 2 times larger than Vatican City. It has remained unclaimed for years. But why? It theoretically falls under the legal term known as terra nullius, which means that theoretically, anybody, including you, can claim it for yourself and start up a brand new country upon the territory. But as with everything, there are some catches, and in order to understand them, you've got to understand a bit of the history first as to why this whole bizarre situation even exists in the first place. Let's rewind a little bit back to the 19th century. Back then, this area and the whole area around it were all controlled by the Habsburgs and then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which means that surprisingly, the British are, for once, not actually to blame for this whole mess up today in the modern world. Back then as today, the land on either side of the Danube River here was inhabited by Croats in the west and Serbs in the east. But it was the Austro-Hungarian government itself, based in Vienna and Budapest, that designed the municipal boundaries between them. To be fair, they did a pretty good job as these boundaries just simply followed the course of the Danube River as it was back at the time. The problems only began developing later when the Austro-Hungarian government decided to try and straighten up the Danube through various hydraulic engineering projects in order to make the river more easily navigable. While they succeeded in making the river easier to transport goods across, they unwittingly created a territorial dispute between the future countries of Croatia and Serbia, because eventually, over the decades, Austria-Hungary would collapse after the First World War, and then Croatia and Serbia would both find themselves inside of Yugoslavia, which itself would eventually collapse in the 1990s. Suddenly, for pretty much the first time in centuries, Croatia and Serbia found themselves as fully separate countries. And over the past several decades, the Danube River up here that theoretically acted as the border had meandered and moved about to a different shape. Now, while they were both part of the same country, this didn't really matter too much. But now that they were both independent of each other, it suddenly did matter a lot. You see, as the Danube meandered and straightened, it gradually did so in a way that left 100 square kilometers of land over on the eastern side, in what would theoretically be Serbia, in all of these locations. Well, it only left somewhere between 10 and 30 square kilometers of land on the river's western bank, concentrated in these 3 really insignificantly tiny pockets. And the land that nobody claims up here, which all theoretically belongs to Croatia. So naturally, Serbia has insisted that the modern boundary between themselves and Croatia is still the Danube River itself, as it is today. Meanwhile, Croatia insists that the boundary is the historical course of the Danube River, as it was more than a century ago back in the 19th century when the municipal boundaries were first drawn up. Regardless of how the river has changed today, effectively, this means that both sides claim all of these chunks of land to the east of the Danube, while no side claims the piece of land that's to the west of the Danube, because from Serbia's standpoint, the border is the Danube River as it is today. And the unclaimed piece of land to the west of the river, therefore, is rightfully a part of Croatia. But Croatia doesn't claim it because if they ever did, it would mean that they recognize the Danube River as it exists today as the border between them, just like Serbia. And it would mean forfeiting all of their much more valuable claims to the more plentiful land over to the east of the river. So that's why neither Croatia nor Serbia claimed this piece of land, and why no other country in the world does either, making it a sort of no man's land in the middle of Europe.